So let's take a look at some of the options in our whitewater solver and how we can make use of the clumping, erosion, and repellents in our whitewater. So all of this clumping, erosion, and repellents, this was the part of revamping the entire whitewater system by Side Effects, and it was done in Houdini 17. And it's great. You can have so much more control. You can achieve a lot more realistic look of your whitewater as well. So let's talk about clumping. What is clumping? Well, by default, it's enabled. And what it does, it clumps your particles together. So your particles will try to stick with each other. And to show you this, I have done a couple of flipbooks to compare for side by side. So you can see that on the left, we have density control switched off, and on the right, we have density control enabled. And you can see that on the right here, the particles are sticking a lot more together. These are the exact same simulation, but one with clumping disabled and one with clumping enabled. And on this one, where the clumping is disabled, you can see that the particles are not trying to stick together. Instead, they are free to move and do whatever they want to. So sometimes, well, most of the times, clumping is a really good option and it would yield really good results. But in this shot, I decided to switch off clumping because it was too much. I wanted the whitewater to have a lot more repellents, and it's kind of hard to achieve that when you have density control enabled. And we'll talk about repellent just in a minute. What you can also do, if you do want clumping but you don't want it that much, you can change the constraint stiffness here to a really low value. So the more this number, the more the clumping, and the less this number, the less the clumping. So you can obviously, if you do want density control in your simulation and you do like that behavior of your whitewater point, or it works for your shot, then I would suggest you to enable this and have a really low value in constraint stiffness. So let's switch that off. All right, now let's talk about erosion. Now, erosion preserves the foam in denser regions and it erodes the foam in sparser regions. So wherever there is more foam, it would try to preserve that foam. Wherever there is less foam, it would try to erode that foam. And you can control the strength of erosion and preservation with these two settings here. So for the erosion, what I want my whitewater to get eroded, but not too much. So I'm going to put that down to 0.3. And I do want the preservation to be a bit stronger, so I can bump that up to 0.6. Right, so that's erosion. Now let's talk about repellents. Probably the most coolest, that's not correct, probably the coolest part of the new whitewater system. Essentially, enabling repellents would introduce cellular behavior in your whitewater sim, so it would create cell-like structures. And to explain this better to you, I have the render of our whitewater here that we can see. And if I play this, you can see that at the end, we can see some cell-like behavior in our whitewater, which adds realism to our sim. And all these settings here would change that cell-like behavior. So the feature size range is pretty obvious. So the size of your repellents, and obviously this setting would help you sell the scale of your scene as well. So I wanted the repellents to be a bit small in the sim, so I went with 0.2 to 0.4. So the minimum size of the repellents would be 0.2 and maximum would be 0.4, and it would randomize between these two values. Now the strength of the cell structure as well, we can change that, which is by default set to 10 to 15, so we can leave that to default. Noise range is a value that goes from 0 to 1, so if I put this to 2, you can see it won't go more than 1. And what it does, it adds noise to the shape of our repellent, 0 being completely circular and 1 being not circular at all. So if you don't want any perfectly circled repellent in your simulation, you should put the 0 to, let's say, 0.2, because 0 would mean that you would have some repellents perfectly circled. Now, I can put this to 0.5 because I want all my repellents to be super noisy. And I can also give some life to my repellents, so 5 to 7. So essentially they would probably not die. 5 to 7 is a lot. Right, so that's repellents for you. Now if I go back to the render and if I play this, you can see that our repellent behavior is very persistent here, and the size range, and you can see there is absolutely not a single repellent that is completely circle in shape, and that has to do with our noise range not being 0 at the minimum. And last but not the least, let's talk about foam location. Now this setting is used to either lower or raise the level of your foam layer relative to the surface of the water. Whatever setting you may put in here, so in minus if you want to lower your foam, or in plus if you want to raise your foam, it wouldn't change your simulation at all. All the settings, the density control, the erosion, repellents, forces, emission, everything would work the same way, but it would either get raised up or lowered down based on what value you put in here. And it's always, not always, but sometimes it's a good idea to raise the foam layer just a tiny bit up so as to make life easier for you when you're comping stuff. So I'm just going to put that to 0.2, so I will raise that by 0.2 units relative to the surface of my water. Right. Now let's talk about on how we can optimize our whitewater sim, how we can save it out, and let's take a look at the flipbook of our high-res whitewater points.